For today, we're just going to go over some very light topics. We're going to start at a very, very high level, and I want you to know that. We are going to get into the weeds later on. We certainly, when we talk about finances and economics, we'll have plenty of opportunity to do that. But today, we really just want to do a few things. We want to talk about MTSP, kind of the history of what we sell. We want to talk about the philosophy of, I guess, how we look at the business, give you an overview of how we look at what we do, and then a few specific terms that we're going to use throughout and make sure we define them. So when I use these terms later on, we make sure we all have a very clear picture of what we're talking about. The initial question is really just as simple as this, is what do we sell? What is it that we sell? If we met somebody on the street and they said, what do you do? What would we say? I mean, are we hardware providers? Are we service providers? What is it exactly that we do? I mean, are we selling these pieces of hardware here? We have office equipment, we have IT equipment, access control, telephony, video surveillance. Are we a telephony company? Are we an office equipment company that's trying to delve into IT? What are we? You know, and how do we define ourselves? Or do we just say that we're a technology company? Typically, if you look in the past, how did this world look? This world looked like, if I'm a company in San Diego and I'm doing business, who do I deal with? And this is years ago. I had a company that provided my phone equipment. I probably had another company that managed my network or did something with my IT. It might have been break fix, it might have been a managed services type of arrangement, but I had a different company that did my IT. I certainly had a different company that did my office equipment, my managed print, multifunction machine, office printers. I might have yet another company that would maybe do some surveillance work if my building had a surveillance system or access control. So I would have 4 different companies to deal with every time I was dealing with technology. Today, we kind of have the same scenario, but we're starting to converge a little bit. Today, we provide our customers with the capacity in really 4 different technologies. We have the IT, telephony, surveillance, and physical security. When I say AV, I kind of incorporate surveillance into AV. So if you hear me say AV, I kind of mean Pro AV with video conferencing, surveillance cameras, and physical security. That's kind of one bundle. And then we have print and OE. There may be a 5th one, which is structured cabling, but some of us do large volume structured cabling, but that's a really completely different business compared to the technology we're delivering in these others. I think you'd all agree. First of all, what are we doing? Well, we're providing the premise equipment for those technologies, and a lot of us got into voice or office equipment or IT years and years ago as really we were providing the hardware, and the support of the hardware in a lot of cases was really an afterthought. It was, hey, I'm going to sell a phone system, or I'm going to sell a copier. I may have a service agreement on it, I might not. I have a phone system, I sold it. I'm going to wait for them to call me in the aftermarket if they have a problem with it, and then I'll go out and service it. We really started as a very hardware delivery was our business. You know, hardware centric is how we really started. And that's kind of how we are today, but it's very different over the last decade or so, because we're providing that equipment, the premise-based equipment for those technologies. But more importantly now, what we're giving them is this. We're giving them that knowledge, that service, and the ongoing technical support so that they can successfully use all those technologies. So it's really less about just a piece of hardware that we sold them 3 years ago. It's really about the ongoing support and really what the customer wants. And you think of this, well, what does the customer want? If you're an auto body shop or a dentist office or a small hotel motel or any other industry, what do you really want out of your technology? Well, you want it to work. Ultimately, you want a low hassle, you want it to work all the time, and you want it to enhance your business and add value to make it easier to get back to doing what you want to do. Everybody, I think, on this call is passionate about technology, wherever you came from. But you know what? The customers you have, they're not really in the business of managing their technology. They really just want the technology to enhance their business so they can get back to their passion. And their passion may be that they're a florist, for all you know, or it may be that auto body shop or a dentist office. and they want their technology to not get in the way of what they're passionate about. So we sell our knowledge and support and technical expertise really more than we're selling just the actual pieces of hardware, the plastic and electronics that make this all possible. What we are is we came up with this term. We said, okay, we're not an IT company or we're not an office equipment company. We really should be branding ourselves as a managed technology service provider. And really, what is that? It's technology agnostic, because in a perfect world, what if you own the customer's technology, not just a piece of it? If we own the technology for a company where we are doing, let's say, their hosted voice solution, we're doing managing their IT, we're taking care of the managed print and the copiers in that building, and maybe we also do the surveillance and access control. We control all parts of that company's technology. Are we pretty sticky at that point? I would say yes. And it keeps, potentially other providers from getting their nose under the tent with your customer and trying to take away that IT business or that telephony business. And one of the things I put in here was, in these green words, the fiber, the SIP, the SD-WAN, wireless, broadband, the connectivity is so important to what we do in this day and age that it really drives the business model. You look back so much, even 5 to 10 years ago, we were doing a lot more remediation on site than we do today. Now even in telephony, we really don't do that many service calls on site unless something physically needs to be replaced. So the connectivity is really driving that convergence of the industry. We can intermingle these disciplines. We don't have to be tied to hardware. We can locate infrastructure at a place different than the physical location of the business, i.e. the cloud. Those things can be anywhere. Without that connectivity, we couldn't have a proactive managed services type of offering without it. And it kind of goes back to what we've been saying for many years, is that he who owns the IT owns the customer. Because really everything we're doing here in all these technologies is really just an application on the land. The managed print, the copier, the telephony, the IP cameras is really all a function of that network. He who owns the network is really going to have the ownership of that customer. A couple key terms I just want to throw out there, especially at the beginning of a class like this. I certainly don't want to assume that everybody has an accounting background and knows exactly what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to throw out some terms that you may already know and probably do, but bear with us here. First one is gross margin. Gross margin is your revenues minus the quote-unquote COGS, the cost of goods sold. Well, what is cost of goods sold? In our world, that is, we bought the equipment and the operational team to install it or service it is part of cost of goods sold. And that is what gross margin leads you to. And so you have your revenues less cost of goods, you come up with a gross margin. Most of us are very familiar with that term. And then you might hear us throw out EBITDA. Now, what is EBITDA? Well, EBITDA is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. This is also known as operating profit. Typically, we refer to EBITDA. That's what we're referring to as the operating profit, is really the profits and revenue or money left over that you have at the end in profit after the core business activity that you're doing. I'm going to define a couple other terms for you a little bit later. One of them is contribution. It'll be a little different, but I'll get to that a little bit later. When I say these things, just want to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about. Now, again, I did mention that we were going to be pretty just high level. And when you think of very, very high level, what we do and how we do it, we sell our products or services. And how do we sell them? Well, we can sell them one time as a transactional sale. We can take a server and sell it to the customer, and it's a one-time deal. We can sell a couple hours of labor to install that server. That's a one-time deal. Anything we do can be really sold as a single-time transaction or recurring revenue, which gets us a little bit of money over time in a different scenario. Recurring revenue is something we've been preaching, and obviously everyone on this call I know certainly has a great appreciation for recurring revenue and what it can do. Recurring revenue is what we say leads to nirvana. Now, nirvana is a term that kind of came up as a joke, and it's become popular nomenclature within TAG. And really, what is it? When we talk about this, we kind of came up with it as a discussion of, okay, what for the folks that have really hit the inflection point, that are uber profitable, that have kind of hit nirvana in their business, what's unique about them? And so we started saying about, like, when have I really made it? When have I kind of died and gone to heaven in the business where we're just really profitable, everything's going very well, we're doing everything very efficiently, we're growing? What is that nirvana in our business? And we came up with this. It's when the recurring revenue meets or exceeds 100% of the costs in the business, but for product. So except for the hardware, software that we buy and resell, every other cost in the business, if we have recurring revenue that covers it, we've kind of gotten there. And that means we're covering all the salaries in the business, the labor load, the taxes and benefits for those salaries, the operating expenses, all of the things that you would consider overhead, owner's compensation. All of that is covered on day one of the month with the recurring revenue that comes in from your contracted customers. And you would think, okay, revenue's good, recurring revenue's good, I get it, but why would it make us that much more profitable? And what we found was that this was really the number one metric that was unique across all the TAG members that were most profitable. One thing that's kind of a little anecdote for me, I joined TAG about 6 years ago. I'd had experience with many different companies, both large and small before that. I'd been a CFO. And when I came into TAG, one of the first things I did is I said, okay, I need to understand kind of what's happening with some of these companies that are pretty profitable. So what I did is I went and looked at, say, every company in TAG that was doing greater than 25% EBITDA, 25%, net profit. And I worked backwards, and I went back to when they joined TAG. The average profitability of a company coming into TAG was typically 4 to 6% EBITDA. And a lot of these companies were in that single digit range. What I found was, with a lot of these companies that were today very profitable, 25% of sales was hitting the bottom line, and that's after owner's compensation is included, and they're still putting 25% to the bottom line. They all started kind of where a lot of us start, which is we're doing okay on some things, not well on others. We're maybe making 7, 8% net profit, and then the next year they would make maybe 9.5, and the next year they'd break 10, and then they jump 2 points to 12. So they're grinding it out. Each year they're maybe adding a little bit to their top line, and they're getting a little bit more profitable. But it's like a point and a half of profitability, and they just barely get into double digits. And then what was happening was very interesting. With all these companies that were above 25% net profit, they went there in like 2 years. So they went from like 12% to 18 to 24 or 25 over the course of 24 months. And it was like the proverbial hockey stick on the profit curve. All of a sudden, they went from gaining a point or point and a half of profitability to putting up 6 or 7 or 8 more points of profitability in a year. This was a big red flag for me of, hey, we need to look at this. Why is it that these folks became so much more profitable all of a sudden? And so what we found was that when that recurring revenue exceeds the cost of all the costs in the business except for product, that's really when we become profitable and powerful. Basically, it means all of our business is kind of hitting its stride. As we're stacking more revenues, everything becomes more profitable when we hit that inflection point. Think of it this way, just some very simple high-level examples is, how about Scott Hobbs? I'm gonna pick on you, Scott, just real quick. If you want to unmute yourself, just tell me real quick, what is your billing rate per hour, if you don't mind sharing that with us, Scott?
So we bill at 160, and we actually say 160 per hour for IT and 140 for voice.
Okay. Well, and here's the thing is, if we've hit that nirvana stage where we're covering every single cost in our business with recurring revenue, and we're exactly even, what happens when Scott goes out and sells one more hour of labor for $160? How much of that goes to the bottom? And the answer is all of it, really. Because guess what? My recurring revenue has already paid the salaries of every tech in that business. It's already covered. Now I've got an additional $160 that just rolled in for an hour of labor. It has nowhere to go but the bottom line. I have no other costs in the business to pay because I've covered all of the salaries, all the labor load, all my OpEx, I paid the rent, I paid the utilities, I have paid everything that I have to pay in this business. So now this extra hour of labor is just gravy, is it not? But everything drops to the bottom line unless we're perfectly absorbed, we don't have an additional hour to spare, and in that case, the only cost would be the extra overtime cost on a single employee. What happens if we do a phone system? Let's say a phone system is something that's typically probably one of the lower, least profitable things that we do is just the actual transaction of installing a premise-based phone system. All of a sudden becomes a pretty profitable deal because everything drops to the bottom line except for the cost to buy the product. Let's say we buy a Pulsar phone system or a Zoltus phone system or an NEC phone system from those companies, and we install it. We basically only have the cost of goods and maybe a marginal sales expense if we have a commission to pay a salesperson. How much of a new MSP contract? If you're already at this nirvana stage, and I know it sounds kind of funny, but it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, and it's a term that we've used to describe it. We're at nirvana. We're covering 100% of our nut, so to speak, with the recurring revenue, and then I go out and sign a new $2,000 a month MSP contract. How much of that MSP contract is going to be profit? Well, really, again, everything is going to drop to the bottom line except for the cost of the outsource, continuum, a BCDR subscription, and the like. And then maybe if we have a sales expense on that one additional sale, and it becomes something that's extremely profitable. Kind of from a statistical analysis of the most profitable members of TAG, what we found was that the rich get richer. The folks that have gotten to nirvana just became, everything they do after that stage becomes pretty darn profitable. Now, obviously, they're going to grow the business to a point where then they need to hire another technician. Maybe they need to bring on another salesperson. Certainly, expenses do grow over time, but the more business we absorb, all of it becomes much more profitable, and that's when you see that proverbial hockey stick on the profit curve. This is the number one metric for enduring financial success. We want to look at the 80-20 rule. I think, is everybody here hopefully familiar with the 80-20 rule? It's kind of be applied to anything. 80% of our sales usually comes from 20% of our customers. We have our big customers that drive most of our sales, and then everybody else. We've got 80% of our new revenues typically comes from 20% of our salespeople. We have the guys who are really out there driving it, and then we have everybody else. People that are successful in life. So you have 20% of people are successful, meaning they're go-getters. They have a reflection on themselves, a drive for personal excellence. That's very different from somebody who's just out looking for just a job and a paycheck. The 80-20 rule is applicable here. And we looked at the 80-20 rule when it comes to TAG members. We found this, is that the best in TAG, the folks that are the most profitable, that top 20%, are doing about 25% or better in EBITDA, in their net profitability after owner salary. This includes an allocation of reasonable salary for ownership, because sometimes people don't take their salary out of profits of the business, they take it out of distributions after the fact. This is always including that we account for an owner's salary in this, and they still make 25% or better. The top record currently is 38.1%, and we're probably next year at our convention going to have somebody coming in that's really closer to 40%. So you think about that. If you were in a $10 million a year business, you'd be putting $4 million a year in the bank after all the bills were paid. And so what we did here is we looked at this and we found that every single TAG member that's above 20%, 25% has hit nirvana. And so we want to make this point. And the point is recurring revenue as a factor of the total cost to run the business should be regularly tracked. It's real easy. It's not rocket science. It's how much recurring revenue did I have last year? What's one number? And then what were my expenses? You can take every expense on your P&L and just back out your product purchases, and that's the quote unquote the nut you're trying to overcome. Nirvana is a very important concept to us, and that's going to be something that we do talk over the next successive weeks here. Maximizing our transactional sales makes the transition to nirvana possible. The reason I bring this up is I want to explain that if we're doing transactional business, that's not bad. There's still good money to be had. in the various sales that we do that are transactional. Not everything can be recurring. And a lot of times things like a transactional sale of IT equipment might be in conjunction with the recurring portion on an MSP contract. We're going to do the business, and sometimes we have to do the business, like we have to sell a phone system if we want the recurring on the support. We want to maximize the profitability on those transactional business, and that makes it easier to transition to more recurring revenue. A good example of this is, in the voice world, if you have a $20,000 phone system that's a premise-based phone system, that's $20,000 of cash flow when you sell it. Now, at the end of the day, when you pay all the bills, it's not a super profitable transaction, but it's still $20,000 worth of sales on your top line in cash. You transition that to a hosted, you're maybe looking at $500 or $600 a month for 30 phones, or actually no, about probably made $750 a month. So all of a sudden, instead of getting $20,000 of cash flow, you're getting $750 a month. Obviously, you need to balance that and make sure that we still have the cash flow to run the business if we're transitioning in that way. We are going to teach you every transaction, every piece of the transactional business. How do we be most profitable in all of those before we get to the recurring revenues? Transactional sales, what we're talking about here is fixed price system sales. This is where the equipment and the installation is included in a fixed bid price. Voice, IT, and AV surveillance standalone product sales. So if we just sell some hardware, that's a transactional deal. And then labor sold by the hour for everything. So if we sell labor by the hour, it doesn't matter if it's IT or voice, office equipment, nothing. It's time by the hour. It all carries the same economics. It doesn't matter if it's project labor, remediation, it doesn't matter. Labor by the hour is just the same for any discipline that we're in. And then recurring sales, we have voice and AV surveillance, partner plans. These are just the maintenance contracts that come with these sales. IT managed services is a big one, lots of moving parts, but that is a recurring revenue for a defined bucket of services to those customers. And then hosted voice and carrier commissions are considered recurring as well. The next one that I want to talk about here is contribution. I already told you a little bit about gross margin, which most of us already know. EBITDA or net profit, operating profit is something we've least heard of usually. There's another concept we have here called contribution, which we want to make sure we define it well because we're going to use it. So every type of transaction, doesn't matter if it's recurring or transactional, it contributes a different amount to our profitability. If I sell time by the hour, I sell 1 hour, I get a certain amount of money. I sell 2 hours, I get another hour's worth. I sell 3 hours. Each hour I sell, I get an additional amount of money. That's a very different economic situation than when I'm getting a fixed amount for an undefined number of labor hours. If I'm getting, let's say, partnering plan dollars they're paying me $350 a month, but I don't necessarily know how many hours I'm going to spend, and each month it's going to be different. Those are two very different profitability scenarios. So each one of those is going to really contribute a different amount to my overall profit at the bottom line. Contribution is this. It's the money we have left over after all the costs to sell and deliver the product or service to the customers, but before we pay any overhead. It's before we pay any G&A, the general administrative expenses. Contribution, if you think of it this way, it's something like gross margin plus. It's really the money we have left over after we purchase the product or service in the course of IT. So we buy the product, we install or we provide the service on the product, and we pay the person who sold the product. The cost of goods sold, and it's also the sales expenses, which are very important, but before overhead. And G&A expense, again, another one of these remedial terms, I'm just going to define it to make sure everybody knows when we say G&A, what we're talking about, is really the overhead expense, back office expense, that type of verbiage. And it's the executive personnel, the accounting personnel, administrative cap, and then all those things that have nothing to do with how much you sold. The rent doesn't care if you had a record sales month or you didn't sell anything. So the rent, the utilities, the insurance, the dues, travel, all these things that really just are a function of I open the doors tomorrow, these are the costs I'm going to have, and they're completely unrelated to whether I sell anything that day or not. Then net profit obviously is the bottom line after paying all the costs in the business. How does contribution help us? Why do we use this contribution? Why don't we just use gross margin? Why don't we just use net profit? Well, it's important because it helps us really get a good picture of deciding what products we're going to sell. When we're picking products to sell, we know we have to sell a certain type of product. When we're evaluating what to sell, I'm going to show you why using contribution is a little bit better than looking at just the price or the gross margin. And then also contribution helps us determine how successful we are in selling any given offering, whether it's in any different discipline. As an example, I want you guys to see this, and again, very, very simple, very high level, but I think it's just good for us to show why contribution is so helpful. You look at, why don't I just look at our sales or just the gross margin? Let's say we have to make a decision on a product to sell. We have an apple or an orange to make a choice here. We have the apple cost, or we're going to sell it for $10,000. The orange is going to sell for $12,000. So I'm like, all right, well, I'm attracted to selling the orange because that's more top line, obviously. But what do we have to consider? How much do these items cost? Well, we have cost of goods sold. On the left, you have $6,000, $7,500 on the right. But the gross margin is still higher on the orange product. I'm going to make $4,500 in gross margin, but I'm going to have $4,000 if I sell the other one. If we want to look at contribution, what do we also have to consider? We have to consider the sales expense as well. Not overhead yet, but just the sales and customer acquisition expense. And what if, for whatever reason, this particular product on the right had higher sales expenses? So after I pay for the cost of goods sold and I pay all my sales expenses, I'm actually better off with $3,500 of contribution left over after I pay those things than the $3,000 I am on the right, even though the sales price and the gross margin is higher with the product on the right. At the end of the day, the money I have left over after I pay all these expenses, I'm actually better off paying or buying or selling the first one. So I want to kind of just see, why contribution is so important when we look at how much this is going to contribute to our bottom line. And contribution is essentially the amount of money we have that we can throw at our overhead. So the contribution out of that $3,500 on the apple, we're going to take some of it and we're going to have to put it towards overhead, and then hopefully we have some left over for profit. And then why don't we look at net profit here? And the reason for this is good as well, because let's say we have two companies. Company B, I'll say maybe this is Barlow, and company U, maybe this is UTEC. Maybe not. Not to pick on you guys. But let's say they both have $100,000 in sales. Company B has $20,000 of net profit. Company U has $12,500. If you're just looking at that, would you make the assumption that Company B was doing things a little better? They had the same amount of sales, but hey, guess what? Company B has higher profits. That must mean that they're better at what they do, or they're more efficient, or they have lower costs because they have more profit. It makes total sense, right? Well, when you really look into it, what if the cost of goods sold were roughly the same? And what if the sales expenses were also roughly the same? Let's say $15,000, 15% of that $100,000 bucks. The contribution is the same, is it not? We have 35% contribution from the primary sales activity. Wouldn't you say that both of these companies are equally successful in the buying and selling of whatever these products were? Because they both have 35% contribution. The sales, the efficiency, the cost is all pretty equal, because guess what? They both have the same amount of money left over in contribution. And in this case, the G&A expense, the overhead, just happened to be higher at one company versus the other. And that may be just because maybe they're in a higher cost of living area. They're in downtown Chicago instead of somewhere in a rural area. What if they have
tag? That's what that means.
What's that?
UTEC's paying too much for tag. That's what that means.
Now, if you're doing that, then you'd be making a lot more money on the bottom line. It's money well spent. But you see, the G&A expense doesn't really have any bearing on how good we are at the buying or selling our goods and services and the delivery of those services. We can be just as, in this case, these companies are equal in their delivery of services, they may have a different overhead picture, an overhead structure that's a little different. The initial supposition here was that company U might have been not as doing as well as company B, but really at the contribution line, which is really the most important, they're actually doing equally well. They are equivalently delivering and pricing their services, and they're managing their costs in the same way, so they're actually equal. They just have a different cost structure, and every cost structure in the G&A is really different for every company in TAG. Most of the best is going to have about 15% of sales, but I'd say the average is probably closer to 20. That's why we look at contribution, and contribution helps us make short-term decisions. And when I say contribution helps us make short-term decisions, it means that, let's say I've got a project out there, and it's $10,000 is what I need to get for this project. Doesn't matter what technology it's in. And the salesperson comes in and says, hey, I got this person. They said they'll sign today, but they wanted to see if we could do it for $9,000. Do you take that deal? Yes or no? Well, it probably depends on a lot of things. Is what technology is it? But the most important thing is, if I know if I sell it for $10,000, I'm going to make, let's say, $2,000 worth of contribution, I may decide to take that deal. And I say, well, I can knock $1,000 off the price. We know salespeople will do this to us very often, where they'll come in, hey, the guy's going to sign, we just have to give him a discount, or we just have to lower the price and meet this other bid, right? It happens all the time. If you understand contribution, you can say, gosh, I was going to make about $2,000 in contribution on this deal. If I lower this price, I'm going to make $1,000, but that's still positive contribution. Okay, I'm going to take that deal. It's really a decision we all make as owners or sales managers probably every day, is how much can I discount and still be positive. So looking at contribution helps us know that if we can make that deal or not. If you have the same deal and you think you're only going to make $1,000, you certainly don't want to discount the top line $1,000, because then you're going to be breaking even on it. That's the short-term decision. If we know what our contribution will be, then we have the ability to make those decisions, those short-term decisions. Net profit really has to be the guiding principle for all the long-term decisions. Can we break rate and go from 10,000 to 9,000 on a project once in a while? Yeah. But what happens if we price every single project in that same manner? We can discount once in a while, but we really can't discount on every deal. That's when we really start hurting our profitability. Let's put it this way. If your $1,000 of contribution, remember, that's before overhead. We still have to pay overhead on that. If we have 10% of that sale is going to be contribution, but our overhead is running 15%, and we price it that way on every single deal in that discipline, then we're going to be upside down profitability-wise. We can do it once in a while, but for long-term decisions, obviously, net profit is the only report card that actually matters. So we need to make our longer-term decisions need to be based on profitability only. That just kind of I'd like to say that gives us a good baseline for kind of some of the things we're going to talk about when we really get into the individual technology lines and start talking about them. Just a quick recap, kind of what we talked about here is we talked about managed technology service provider. In a perfect world, could we be tech agnostic and say, you know what, we want our customers to think of us as whatever they need technology-wise, we're going to provide it. You don't have to be that tomorrow. It does take time to move into, let's say, surveillance and security if you don't sell that. But that's a possibility. But if we can own the customer's technology, we really do have a very sticky relationship with that customer, and we're more of a partner to them than just a vendor. And wouldn't we all like to be in that kind of relationship with our customers? So we talked about some of the terms that are very important to TAG. Nirvana is a big one. Recurring revenue. It's really the place at which you hit the inflection point and just start becoming uber profitable. This is that place where every dollar of sales above the Nirvana stage is very profitable dollars. You end up becoming a lot more profitable very, very quickly. And then lastly, contribution. Just tracking how much money should we make on any product or service. So how much contribution should we make from an hour of labor? We're going to talk about that. How much contribution before overhead should we make if we're going to get into selling managed IT? We're going to define that. how much contribution should we make on voice partnering plans, or let's say contract sales, the fixed price surveillance or phone system sales. We're going to talk about that. So we're going to define how much money should we be making in contribution terms, no matter what we sell. We're going to define every single data point for every type of product that we might sell as an MTSP. That is that. Any questions? Let me open it up. We have about 10 minutes left, but I can stay a little longer. If there's extra questions, I'll leave it up to you guys. Any questions from the attendees here? Okay. All right, guys. Well, just kind of another kind of caveat. We just wanted to start this off with a very, very broad overview. Pretty simplistic, pretty simple in what we're trying to do. And as we move forward, we're going to talk in depth of these other types of businesses and how we deliver and sell certain types of hardware, software, and the services to support that technology. And we'll get a lot more deeper, but we really kind of wanted to use this initial session just to set the tone and give us a baseline of what we're going to talk about in the upcoming weeks. So I'll leave it at that. If anybody has any questions after we get off here, please feel free. You're always welcome to either just drop me an email or give me a quick call if you have any questions pop up into mind. And I think you will have a lot more as we get into some of the more details on the delivery and pricing of some of these services. So anyway, reach out to me if you have any questions. I think we will end it there.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, thank you,
No
Tim.
problem. All right, we'll see you next week.
Thank you very much. Take
Bye.
care.
Bye-bye.